Good morning. This is Joseph Zolliker with AWS. We're going to give our attendees about 1 more minute, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Great. Thanks, everybody. So again, this is Joseph Zolliker with AWS. I would like to thank all of you on the webinar today for taking time to join us on this webinar with respect to managing connected devices at scale, which is hosted by Bsquare, Eseye, Intel, and Amazon Web Services. Today, the webinar is really going to focus on a couple really core topics related to device management. The first part we'll talk into is like defining what do we mean by device management. Again, as there's a number of folks on the phone, your interpretation of what device management may be versus what we're speaking of may align or may be different. So again, I think it's very, very important to set the context in terms of when we speak of device management, what is it that we're referring to? Secondly, why is device management vital to your business? What are the benefits of actually integrating and using a strong device management solution? We're going to talk about a case study. We'll have some Q&A, and we're going to also have our chosen partners kind of speak with respect to their value proposition as well. So what are the building blocks of an IoT solution? So really to kind of help set the context, on the actors within a edge-to-action solution, what we wanted to do is maybe just cover some of the core elements and noting full well that, things with respect to security, operating systems, and other pieces of this are all part of a stack that builds up an edge-to-action solution. But for, a context for today and simplification, the architecture drawing that you see is what we're using. So when we describe like an edge device or a thing, that's really, a device that actually includes some form of embedded processing, and the embedded processing the embedded processing capabilities vary based on the device. There's sensing elements and there's communication technology, right? And the edge devices and things will vary by complexity, computational capabilities, and network capabilities. As we move up the stack, we look at the gateway, and of course how would I say, the responsibility of the gateway, is really to perform, as part of an intelligent system to collect, aggregate, and act on the data locally from non-IP based edge devices or things. The amount of edge processing that may be on that gateway is deterministic based on a system level architecture. As we're all seeing within the space, the notion of edge compute, pushing more compute power to the gateway to do more localized processing is obviously very in vogue, and working with our friends Intel to be able to support those types of applications and capabilities. As we kind of look at moving up the stack here, communication technology and the myriad of protocols used by enterprises today is really critical to moving the data, to the cloud for processing. And then we're going to learn from Eseye, how they provide access to more than 400 global cellular networks, and it's tightly integrated with AWS, IoT, to really help you simply and securely connect your device to the AWS cloud. And then finally, right at the end of the day, right, I use the term there's an app for that, and this is really the gist of what we're talking about with respect to the webinar today. To make all this work seamlessly, and integrate into enterprise device flows. Databe Managed from Bsquare is an enterprise-grade application that is purpose-built really to solve the challenges enterprises and customers face when they develop, deploy, and seek to manage large global fleets of devices and assets. So what is IoT device management, or how is it that we go ahead and define it? For the context of this webinar, we define device management as managing remotely the setup, connectivity, operations, and maintenance of a connected asset or thing. Device management, is an ongoing activity that is used to maintain system uptime, feature enhancements, and security is, for specific examples. And if we all think about as we have devices deployed, as new features and functions come, how do we push that to our users and our customers to create a different experience, provide security patch updates, and fundamentally just make the devices work better over time. The notion in a large-scale deployment of sending somebody out with a USB stick is obviously practically not possible. So, and one of the things that we'll see here later in the webinar, is a customer use case from Bsquare demonstrating these concepts at scale. Also, with respect to this, is as enterprises deploy these larger global fleets of devices to gain these insights, and really drive the operational efficiencies, in their business and processes that these connected devices, really promise, right? It is a challenge for these companies to keep those devices up and running and managing them, especially in industries, we see like in industrial space and others, where 5 to 10 years is expected of an asset to be deployed and managed kind of in the field. And again, as enterprises, bring on more and more fleets of devices, it becomes almost not an unruly, but it becomes a very, very difficult task to manage kind of day to day. And again, as I kind of just spoke about, right, the device counts grows exponentially, right? Enterprises, will definitely find it more difficult to keep the increased volume activities and the added complexity by large fleets of deployed devices. Really, just being able to manage that at scale, will become something that has to be done, and there needs to be a seamless solution to kind of help do that. Okay, at this point, what I'd like to do is maybe introduce our collaborating partners, Intel, Eseye, and Bsquare. So what I'd like to do is please welcome Seshagri, who is the General Manager of Business Development for IoT Partners with Intel. Sesh?
Thanks, Joe, for the introduction. I'll briefly introduce Intel and our collaboration with AWS. Intel is a leader in semiconductor platforms and helps technology providers put data to work end-to-end and edge-to-cloud so businesses can achieve greater efficiency, make better decisions, and create more value for customers and employees. We've been collaborating with AWS for more than 10 years. Intel's hardware and software offerings power intelligent devices, IoT gateways, AWS infrastructure providing compute and intelligence in the cloud and at the edge, and end-to-end solutions. Intel is also an advanced APN IoT Competency Partner. Now I'll hand it back to you, Joe.
Great, thanks, Sesh. Our next speaker I'd like to introduce is Ian Marsden, Chief Technology Officer at Eseye.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So Eseye is a specialist global IoT connectivity service provider. So we connect and manage using cellular networks, customers' fleets of devices. We've been around probably about 10 years now, and 2 years ago we became an AWS Advanced Technology Partner, again within the IoT competency, and have been working closely to integrate our connectivity services with AWS since that time. Through our unique AnyNet secure eSIM solution, we provide access to over 400 mobile operators across the globe, and our AWS Marketplace integration provides full control of a customer's IoT fleet from within the AWS IoT core. Additionally, we provide device-centric managed connectivity to our customers with a range of consulting and enhanced support services to ensure their IoT fleet continues to meet the business requirements, not only at installation, but also throughout its lifetime. Back to you, Joe.
Great, thanks, Ian. And finally, what I'd like to do is introduce Dave McCarthy, VP of Marketing at Bsquare. Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and welcome everyone. So as introduced, my name is Dave McCarthy, and I'm representing Bsquare Corporation. Bsquare, for about 20 years or so, has been in the business of helping its customers bring smart connected devices to market. And we've done this in many different industries with many top companies, including Coca-Cola and Ford Motor Company and Honeywell, all with the intent of not just thinking of it in terms of devices and maybe some of the things that people fall into a little bit around IoT and IoT technology, but really trying to think about the business side of why do people invest in this in the first place, and how do we tie together the necessary technology to help them deliver on the business outcomes that they're looking for. And we do this in a couple of different ways. I appreciate Joseph's comments of there's an app for that, because one of the things that Bsquare does provide to its customers is an application suite called Databe. And it is a suite of edge-to-cloud software applications that are specifically designed around IoT use cases and integrated with many of the AWS services. And so today we'll talk a lot about things like IoT Core and IoT device management as sort of some of the key tenets for that. But then in addition, we also recognize that for many of the enterprises and industrial companies that are looking to deploy these types of solutions, it requires more than just the kind of the building blocks and the pieces, but it's how do you provide the integration both on the edge side or the device side and the cloud side, as well as configuration help. And so we combine the software that we provide along with professional engineering services to deliver that complete solution and do that in conjunction with our partners, like everybody on the call today. We were one of the original launch partners for AWS around their IoT competency, and we continue to stay actively involved in the things that they're doing in the space and following the general trend of where IoT is going. So I'm going to spend a few minutes not talking about Bsquare, but talking a little bit about why this is important and maybe some of the key concerns that I would hope that people can think about on this call as they think through device management strategy, leveraging a little bit of that experience that we've had here at the company and others in terms of what we're seeing and why it's important. And so we'd be remiss if we didn't provide at least a few industry statistics, and these are being provided by Gartner around both the volume of devices that are going to be out there and connected. And so their recent study talks about 20.4 billion connected things. And that's a really large number. But what's maybe even more important than that is not necessarily like what the general volume is, but the overall rate of increase. And so when you think about things like this 82%, this sort of trajectory and rapid acceleration of what's happening in the market, I think it's becoming more and more important. And if you tie that back to something like device management, you would almost wonder why all of a sudden is device management really important? Why is it on the tip of everybody's tongue right now? And Gartner also published their Magic Quadrant for industrial IoT platforms earlier this year and actually specifically called out the fact that device management in some respects was overlooked in a way. And I think in my mind, it has a lot to do with where IoT deployments have been and where they're going. When you're in a lab environment and you have a small amount of devices, you're more concerned about, will this even work at all? And maybe you start thinking about data analytics and all that kind of stuff. But when you start really deploying these in mass and at scale, all of a sudden device management is no longer a luxury, and it's really important. So some stats I think that are important to frame a bit of the conversation. When we look at key activities, one of the ways I like to think about this is device management as sort of like a life cycle. There are different things that devices need and that businesses need to be considering as they go through the life cycle of an IoT device. And certainly it starts off with the setup. So the commissioning and provisioning of these devices, whether they're in the four walls of a building or out in the field, you want to find ways of doing that in a structured and scalable way so that it's not an individual person touching all those. And so that kind of bringing onboarding process is an incredibly important part. And then you have connectivity. And for many people, when they're thinking about IoT solutions, it's not single modal. I mean, there's usually a multiple set of access methods that IoT devices are joining the overall infrastructure. And some of them might be wireless, whether that's using mobile or cellular technology, or whether it's things like Wi-Fi, or it could be wired IoT endpoints. And the reality is you need to think about the different methods of that connectivity, the aspects that are important to those, and how do they all come back into a sort of a single comprehensive way. And then operation. This idea that you're investing in this because you expect some certain lifespan of that device to be out there doing whatever it's supposed to do. It could be temperature sensors that are out in the field. It could be heavy equipment or machinery that's producing some sort of a yield. But whatever it is, you have sort of daily operations that you want to be able to keep track of to understand both how the business is performing as well as trying to understand what you might want to do if you see degradation in that performance. And then ultimately maintenance, because in all cases, things break. And so how can you be smarter as a business to either get ahead of when one of those failure modes might occur? And even when they do occur, how can you be quicker and more accurate around the types of decisions you might want to make around maintenance activities? And ultimately, in the end, this really culminates in the fact that maintenance, maybe the final maintenance event for any device, is the decommissioning and end of life. So these are kind of 4 activities that I think are kind of important to think about in your general IoT device management strategy. And if we look at then the benefits, there are sort of 4 benefits that kind of map into concerns that you might run into as you go through that life cycle. And we'll spend a few minutes diving into each one of these because they all warrant some consideration and understanding. But it starts off with unification and automation of process. If you believe any of those numbers on the Gartner slide, or just even your own experiences, as you start growing and scaling, you have to think about how you automate a lot of that practice. The days of looking at dashboards and looking for red, yellow, green, and making decisions from a network operating center are really days gone by. You can do that in a small population of devices, but not when you get to scale. The second is around really understanding the technology that's needed to build out your strategy. And sometimes it's easy to think very much in the near term of, well, what is it that I need today to accomplish my near-term goals? But when you think about the pace of where IoT is going, and in some cases, the fact that, especially for devices that are out in the field, it won't necessarily be easy in the future if you architect things in a narrow fashion and find out a year or 2 down the road that you hit some sort of a limitation, that you'll be able to go back and fix that in a cost-effective way. And so, trying to think through that scalability concern now, I think, will prove important as you go along your journey. The third is one that I find actually really interesting, which is IoT for competitive advantage. This idea that there's value in the data that's being generated from this equipment, and you want to be able to have a good strategy for ensuring that data flow stays consistent and that there's integrity in the data, because in all cases, businesses are trying to figure out how this gives them a leg up from the competition. And then also, finally, making sure that for the money that you're investing in an IoT solution, that you have faith in the fact or confidence that you'll get some return on that, and thinking about ways of reducing risk. And so for each 4 of these, we'll go into a little bit more about why I think that these are concerns that people should be thinking about. And when we talk about that process unification and automation, a lot of it involves minimizing operational costs. So we talked about the consistency of making sure that if you have multiple devices or multiple business units or multiple aspects of your business, that you aren't trying to solve these on a one-off basis. And I recognize that in the early days of IoT, that's exactly what a lot of companies did. There were different operational teams that figured out ways or motivations for deploying IoT, and so they would maybe each go off on their own mission to figure out how to, maybe in a proof of concept way, deliver that functionality. But now the idea is you want to be able to start looking more holistically across your organization and really make sure that you're using common technology. And the reason for it, of course, is that a lot of the tasks that you're doing in an IoT, especially in that operations and maintenance mode, can be time consuming, especially if you're a company that has a field service organization where you're required to either roll a truck or send out a technician to the field. Every one of those is an expensive event for your company. And so ways that you can reduce that, I think, is important. Certainly when we think about that technology and making sure that you're avoiding the over or the under investment, I'd be, again, also remiss if I didn't say that security is important. Every endpoint that you put out there in your network has that potential to be a security entry point or attack surface for somebody. And I don't say that to scare you, and you shouldn't be scared, because if you put the right strategy in place, you can make sure that both the security part is designed in from the start, and that when you do find things like zero-day vulnerabilities, that you have a comprehensive way of being able to update those. And that includes things like remote management and monitoring. And in fact, there's future work that I know AWS is doing in improving even some of that edge security scenario. When it comes to the competitive advantage, I usually look at things in terms of whether or not companies are finding ways of either reducing cost for their business, or maybe even looking at introducing new business models, or maybe an as-a-service or recurring revenue streams. And it doesn't matter which side of that coin you're on; those are all important things. And so you want to make sure that if you are sort of depending on that kind of part of your business, that you have the right underpinnings in place, and that you're getting the data that you need to drive that competitive advantage. And finally, as I mentioned, this idea of minimizing risk. And that's one of the things that, as we get into maybe some of the value points that Databe provides as part of the Bsquare solution, how we can shift, some of that sort of upfront initial investment cost that you might think of in terms of deploying this into more of a TCO conversation around, what is this going to look like multiple years down the road? And if you're a business, especially if you're one of those industrial companies I mentioned, you might be concerned around, how do you minimize downtime, and how do you be smart about maintenance costs that are around there, and then the scalability side, because the last thing that I think any company wants is to really hit on something that's valuable for the business and then find out there's some constraint or some bottleneck that they run into. So all of these things I think are important when you consider sort of your overall device management strategy. So now I'm going to pivot a little bit into where does Bsquare play into this? And as Joseph mentioned in the start of the call, one of the products that we offer up to the market is called Databe Managed. And this is very specifically our device management solution that's built upon AWS. Maybe the easiest way to describe it is that it's an edge-to-cloud SaaS, or software as a service app, that improves the manageability of your IoT devices. So, okay, it's a lot of buzzwords, but what does that really mean? We use the term edge-to-cloud because I think it's incredibly important to realize that there are many important workloads that the cloud provides, and you want to be able to leverage that scalability and security that AWS can offer. But when you're thinking about devices and device management, there's also an edge side. And AWS also provides this as part of their Greengrass platform. And Bsquare augments this in terms of how do you tie those two together so that they're not disjointed, but they work together. This idea around a SaaS application means that it's something that you can deploy very quickly. It's very business-oriented, not developer-focused, and accelerates you to be able to get the business value that you're looking for and moves you quicker towards what you're doing. Because once you do, with Databe, it allows you to take actions on insights and control millions of devices remotely. And I recognize that not everybody has millions of devices today. But again, back to making sure that you're thinking about the future, you want to have confidence that whatever that you solution or technology that you invest in today will be able to take you there. And so we have a few sort of points around, what it is that Databe Managed can do. Like, where does Bsquare sort of fit into helping you achieve those concerns that we talked about earlier? And the first is certainly around automation. And what are the things that you might want to automate? In many cases, it's things like pushing configurations down to devices, or actions, or patches or updates in the cases of where there's things that you want to be able to maintain sort of uniformity and compliance to a standard, perhaps. There's definitely things that are important when we think about security, whether it's security in terms of user-based security, in terms of who's able to access the system and what roles do they play, and how can you get granular about making sure that different teams have access to the right types of devices when they need it and only when they need it. Things like making sure that you have integrity and security of the data stream. So whether this is data that's in transit over any of those access methods that we talked about earlier, or even at rest. And then even device identity verification. I think this is another one of these areas where it's important, especially as you start getting into more automated device provisioning, that you have a method of being able to understand, when devices come in, whether they fit the right policy and profile to auto provision, or whether or not it's something that requires an operator or a human to be able to add their own sort of understanding to. And then also creating some level of autonomy on the devices itself. This is in many cases where the edge side of the computing story plays out, where if a device has the right logic in place to understand when it may not be healthy, or when it may be sort of compromised, or may require some sort of remediation for whatever the reason, that you have rules-based actions that can go and do that immediately and report back. So you're not forced to sort of manually react to situations, but you get more proactive. This also plays into the idea of this single management view. And people have been saying for years, using the overused term a little bit of single pane of glass, but the idea is whatever you're doing in your business, back to that sort of consolidated view, you want to be able to view that in a single view that allows you to get through large volumes of devices. And I'll tell you, it's not necessarily an easy problem to solve. It's one thing when you have hundreds and thousands, but when you get to the hundreds of thousands and the millions, you need to be able to search, you need to be able to group things, you need to be able to really understand where those devices are in their life cycle, because each one is going to have different needs depending on whether it's early on in that sort of setup provisioning phase, or whether it's in that later stage of maintenance and perhaps even decommissioning, and be able to do it in a way that's not cumbersome. So the idea is, if the software isn't enabling you to do things faster and better, then it probably isn't designed well. And we think about Databe Managed as being a solution that really tries to solve a lot of those sort of roadblocks and potential sticking points that people run into. And we do it through a combination of simplified management for attributes and asset models, and being able to tie those things to locations. There's also the aspect of, once you have devices that are connected, and that you are being able to collect and understand all of that data, how do you start leveraging the information coming off of those devices to improve the business in some way? And so there is an analytics portion of what we're talking about, whether these are sort of simple analytics around, what is it that you want to understand in terms of your overall fleet of devices, and what's the ratio of healthy to unhealthy, and what might you be able to do to both sort of minimize costs and maximize performance, and how to be more proactive and optimize some of the operational aspects that are going on. And it also gives you the opportunity, sort of, in some respects, maybe what I'm trying to say is, in device management, once you have the foundation set, you now have put yourself in a position to start leveraging the insights that are coming out of there and figuring out how do those now start affecting your business processes and workflows. Like, how do you use that now to build that competitive advantage that I mentioned earlier, to make it very easy to go back to your CFO and say that every dollar I'm spending on a solution like this is benefiting the business in a way that's just so obvious that somebody says, how do we continue to do more of that? And then also there's the fact that, we build our technology very tightly with AWS. And we do it for many good reasons. AWS provides effectively an infinitely scalable compute cloud for us in terms of being able to scale to the numbers that IoT requires. And so we're tapping into services that are there. It helps make sure that, especially when we think about sort of mission critical environments, and a lot of the industrial or Fortune 500 customers that we work with, they have demands for high availability. And often, depending on the industry that they're in, they have very specific sort of compliance requirements. And that might be compliance depending on locality, it might be compliance based on industry, but being able to leverage a lot of what they provide is incredibly important. And then, of course, what we do is we build on top of that to make it very easy and quick for enterprises and other companies to be able to take that same benefit without going through a sort of a custom development exercise in and of themselves. So in many cases, we try to think of ourselves as the quick and easy way of leveraging all of the value that AWS provides and the other partners that are on this call to deliver that solution. And part of that means that we can also offer our customers a very simple and predictable per device subscription model, meaning that AWS provides lots of great tools to understand how consumption might work under the covers, but for an enterprise, it's hard for them to know for every device I add, what does that really mean in terms of underlying things? And with Bsquare, you don't need to know that. With Bsquare Databe, all you need to know is that if you can forecast the number of devices that you have and the activity that they're going to do, we can very easily give you a predictable, forecastable model. And finally, I mentioned that Bsquare has been helping companies for a long time do many different things with IoT, and even though today's conversation is specifically around device management, and we touched on the fact that there are insights and other things that you can do, that we ultimately try to think of this as creating this closed data feedback loop between information that's being generated from the field and existing enterprise systems, and how do you get all of that done in an automated, comprehensive way, because ultimately what you want to be able to do is provide real-time transparency into device health. And you also want to be able to identify, asset utilization. And that integration part, I can't stress enough, because so many of the use cases, and we'll get to one in a few minutes, isn't just about device data coming in. It's about how do you combine device data with other enterprise sources to really get to those business outcomes and value that you're looking for. So with that, Joseph, I'm going to pass it back to you and let the other partners talk about how they ultimately come together for this overall solution.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for that very informative explanation on device management and how Databe Managed really can help, a lot of the enterprises address and solve some of the most demanding requirements, that's required of a enterprise-grade device solution here. So for those on the webinar, just want to remind everybody to just a quick reminder that you could go ahead and submit any questions you may have in the chat windows. At the end of the webinar, we'll review and answer your questions. And at this point, what I'd like to do is to transition and all of our partners, Eseye and Intel, an opportunity to share their value proposition and offering. So with that, Ian?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So obviously, you've heard a lot from Bsquare on this call already relating to device management and why having robust, scalable solution designed in from the outset can really save a lot of headaches, accelerating ROI and reducing risk. Of course, all of this in reality relies on the IoT device having a reliable connection for application and management data into AWS, and this is very much where Eseye comes in. As I alluded to earlier, Eseye developed the AnyNet secure eSIM solution specifically for AWS to be the easiest way to get devices connected to AWS globally using cellular networks. It provides multiple operator connectivity, including over-the-air profile loading to meet local regulatory permanent roaming restrictions whilst conforming to the latest GSMA and EUICC specifications. So multiple profile or multi-IMSI solutions are proven to increase the uptime on IoT fleets globally, but without a solution like the AnyNet managing this, it becomes a really complex burden on the customer, and this is one Eseye aims to simplify. For example, rather than contracting with multiple cellular operators, you deal with only one. Rather than deploying multiple SIMs, you deploy only one. Rather than working with multiple support desks, you work with our global support team. In order to make it simple to use the AnyNet solution, Eseye has integrated its services using the AWS Marketplace integration into the heart of the AWS IoT core. And this enables things like lifecycle management, certificate delivery, analytics, and anomaly detection, all at the click of a button. So Eseye really enables the device application and management data to flow straight into the IoT core, whilst blocking unwanted traffic potentially caused by misconfigurations or misuse of the device. So that marketplace integration extends from just delivering the data itself, but it also manages the life cycle of the SIM without any further integration required. It deals with post-deployment certificate delivery to the device. And even more on top of that, it provides the network side metadata needed for services such as analytics, device defender, device manager. So there's no additional integration required to use those solutions. Global AnyNet connectivity then appears as a line item on the customer's existing AWS bill. So again, there's even more reason to use it. There's no separate commercial agreements that need to be set up, and that's for global connectivity. So the purpose of this really is to greatly simplify the process of connecting IoT devices, making it easier to deploy, remotely manage throughout their lifetime. Ultimately, all of this is reducing the total cost of ownership, business risks, and the time to market for IoT on AWS. In summary, removing significant layers of management and technical complexity, Eseye AnyNet Secure is designed to be the easiest one-stop global connectivity solution for AWS IoT customers today. That's really what Eseye does.
Great, thanks, Ian. Thanks for that overview, and really would like to thank Eseye in terms of the work that you guys have done with us. So obviously, integrating with the AWS IoT core and really making it very, very simple to like the one click to fundamentally securely connect your edge assets into AWS IoT core. The work is exceptional, and we're very, very happy to have you on as a partner. So with that, Sesh, if you'd like to share with us Intel's value proposition and offering.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think you heard about AWS device management and the device management service from Bsquare and the connectivity solutions from Eseye. I will now talk about the edge and gateways and sensors and things like that. IoT solutions are diverse depending on the vertical segment use cases, ranging from industrial, logistics, healthcare, smart cities, and retail. There are diverse technical and business requirements. Intel offers flexible, scalable Intel architecture for device management and analytics at the edge for real-time insights and actions. We have the right silicon, performance per dollar per watt for every node, and a scalable architecture, including CPU and various accelerators such as GPU, VPU, FPGA, to be able to address the wide range of IoT use cases from both technical and business perspective. Given that flexibility, it's important to have a seamless developer experience across multiple applications. So Intel helps simplify application development with SDKs and toolkits that allow developers, and these developers can be embedded developers or cloud developers, to easily access hardware capabilities securely through APIs. Basically, develop the application once and have the ability to run the same application seamlessly across multiple Intel target platforms, whether it's CPU, GPU, VPU, or FPGA. SDKs and toolkits provide capabilities to aggregate device data and provide security and management at the edge with Intel-based IoT gateways. Intel also has an SDO solution, or secure device onboard, that protects the privacy and identity of the device owner and securely onboards the device onto the IoT platform or device manager in a seamless, frictionless way. The SDO works with AWS Device Manager and AWS IoT. There are a lot of Intel gateways that are available that support AWS Simple cloud connectors, such as the AWS IoT Device SDK, to connect to AWS IoT Core and AWS Greengrass, and support services like ML at the Edge for edge intelligence. We also have a lot of security SDKs and toolkits. Intel believes in securing the IoT solution starting from the edge, as we know that every endpoint on the network is a potential attack surface. So we deliver a built-in hardware foundation or root of trust that protects the platform data and enables trusted applications without compromising performance. Some of the key things that we do from a security perspective: trusted execution, protected data and keys, platform integrity, and crypto, hardware-assisted crypto. We also expose security APIs for third-party applications and agents running on Intel gateways, such as applications such as device management and edge analytics. Back to you, Joe.
Great. Thanks, Sesh. And thank you again for the work, obviously integrating AWS services natively into a lot of your end devices, single board computers, gateways, and make it really simple, for our customers to take advantage of all the goodness that's kind of been created in that Better Together story. So with that, I'd like to maybe turn it over to Dave McCarthy and have Dave walk us through a recent customer win leveraging Databe. Dave?
Yeah, Joseph, thank you. So absolutely. So we've talked a lot about today, like why is device management important and what you should be thinking about. And we've talked a lot about 3 different partners that work in conjunction with AWS, deliver these kind of end-to-end solutions, because in so many ways, I think IoT is unique compared to other technology initiatives where there's typically not one company that provides the whole solution, but you want to be able to have confidence that these things can work together. And so to make it real, we're going to talk about a Fortune 100 company that is deploying Databe currently and what some of their challenges were and why this became the right choice for them. And when I say this became the right choice, why the Bsquare Databe solution and AWS together were a good option. And so to set the stage on this, let's talk a little bit about sort of the customer scenario. So this is one of the world's leading consumer packaged goods companies, and their situation is that they have a retail-oriented device that they put out that has a very customer-facing interface. And part of what they wanted to do initially was really create more choice and a better customer experience and using sort of a smart connected device to be able to do this. Now, they also recognized that there was a lot of benefits they could get by putting such a device out into market, whether it's things like being able to understand product sell-through and how you might use that to synchronize things like supply chain and even that field service component of what happens when one of these machines break. And so, by nature of that, they wanted to be able to be very nimble and agile, if you will, around being able to provide frequent updates. And so maybe this is a little bit different, or one way of kind of thinking about, what are some of the unique differences around IoT device management than maybe some of the previous waves of similar technology before, is that it wasn't just update an operating system or update a firmware once or twice a year. It was, how do we get really quick and dynamic around the things that we're doing? And they had a pretty scaled out deployed base, so about 50,000 devices of these machines that are out there in the field. And again, they were looking for something that wouldn't just address their current needs, but would be able to set them up for future iterations around capabilities and provide a good foundation or base for them to build upon. And so one of the decisions that they ran into, and I think it's a decision that lots of companies run into, is how do they go about solving that problem? Do they go out and buy an off-the-shelf device management solution like Bsquare Databe, or do they build from scratch? And so they went through this assessment, and it was actually part of the way that AWS originally got engaged with the customer to look at what would it take to pull together the components to do this. And for some companies, they would view it as a core competency for themselves, and they would view that they want to be able to build out those solutions and take on the testing and support and the maintenance of that. But for other companies, and for this one in particular, they had some concerns. They were concerned about how long it would take to do such an implementation. They were concerned about the maintenance and support and what happens when you need new features, who are going to build those. And then, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, they were also trying to figure out, like, how do I, from a business perspective, really understand how I forecast in a predictable way what some of my software costs might be as that 50,000 devices turns into 100,000 devices and wherever they may go as a business. And so what they chose to do was to work with Bsquare and choose the Databe application and the integration services that, again, leverages a lot of the key AWS services, including AWS IoT Core and AWS Device Management, not to mention the rest of the infrastructure and platform that the AWS cloud provides, to give them a solution that met their business need and was able to do it in a very timely way and reduced cost. And they were also a great example of a company, as I mentioned earlier, that it wasn't just for them, being able to pull in information from these devices in the field, but to do some of that contextual content updates to be able to give that good customer experience. It required integrations into the things of like the CRM system, in terms of machines were actually located at a given time. It also meant it was integration into their content management system, so that depending on what that said, they knew that they had the right visual assets and things that were going in there. So anyway, a great example of a customer for us, where we were able to give them exactly what they needed in a very regimented time scale that met both their sort of immediate software needs, but also set them up for success in the future. And really look at again the sort of the summary of the benefits. Part of that was that faster deployment. They didn't have to go down a custom development effort to build out the overall application that they would use, that their fleet managers would use within the business to be able to understand the health of the fleet of devices and what the current state of all that was. That whole idea that there was a much simpler way that we were able to bring together so that when they had these sort of complex configuration options around which device, which is in which location, that required which sort of visual assets, that we were able to provide that being able to offer that sort of simple per device pricing where they sort of obfuscated some of the underlying services costs, but give them something that they were able to easily build a ROI business model around. And then again, going with a more product-based offering like Bsquare Data V meant that not only did they get a roadmap of future product enhancements, but they had a place to go for things like customer support. So Joseph, that's our case study overview, and I think now we're probably ready for some Q&A.
Great, thanks, Dave. So what I would like to do is maybe just open it up here to some of our panelists. So Ian or Sesh, because as Dave has just kind of finished, would one of you guys maybe like to address maybe one or two of the questions in the chat window?
Sure. This is Sesh. I have a first question regarding sensors and Intel processors. The question reads, can I use Intel processors and sensing technology to make legacy devices smart? Or should I use do I have to buy some newer devices? So that was the question. And then the answer, yes, as long as we have the legacy devices, they are able to run supported OSs, I mean, typically Linux and Ubuntu or Yocto, things like that. And they have the legacy devices have the right I/O. It is possible to download software stacks and configure them for connecting to the sensors and sensor modules. Intel supports a number of software stacks for sensor protocols. You can find the information on software.intel.com. A lot of these are available for download from GitHub. Some of them are MRAA, UPM, and SAS, Sensor Analytics Framework. And the other way is if this doesn't work, then it is possible to connect those legacy devices, to connect them to the IoT gateways and complete the IoT solution. So basically, these legacy devices act as sensors, I mean, from a gateway perspective, and then you can connect them to the gateway and then take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Sesh. Ian?
Yeah.
Would you like to address one? Yep.
Certainly can. So there's a question on there which is relating to the advantages of using multiple cellular providers over a single provider, and so I'd certainly like to address that. I mean, this is something we deal with every day. We have deployments that are relating to single providers and multiple providers, and it's regular that we see a single network deployment achieving uptimes typically around 80%. And multi-networks increases to the high 90s. And this is primarily down to coverage in specific locations. But additionally, multiple profiles often help a lot when dealing with the inevitable operator outages that occur from time to time. And also, they provide an element of future-proofing, for example, dealing with connectivity sunsets, etc., such that they don't jeopardize the underlying service and business case for the IoT deployment in the first place.
Great. Thanks, Ian. So, Dave McCarthy, so, one of the things, we're seeing here in terms of some of the questions is really like, how long does it take, to get a device management solution in place on the average? And again, just because of your guys' expertise, I think you can talk more in generalities, as, of course, no two are probably alike, but yet, multiples are maybe similar. Could you maybe address the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we think of this, one of the advantages that Bsquare Databe provides as being a software as a solution application that you can use for device management means that much of it comes out of the box on day one. And so it's not necessarily as much of a customization exercise as much as it is a configuration exercise depending on the environment. So in many cases, back to that edge to cloud sort of scenario, there's always some agents that need to be put out on devices that help sort of create that sort of end-to-end loop. And then there's a device modeling exercise to make sure that we understand, what are the key things that are important about that device, whether it's, attributes in terms of the anatomy of the device, as well as sort of the number of data points and how often you want to transfer them and all that kind of stuff. But back to a timing perspective, it's something that we think about in terms of like matters of weeks versus months and years, perhaps. And we've actually put together a very repeatable process that we think of when we go in and pilot a new technology for a company to show them very quickly how we can demonstrate this in a very small scale. And then everybody is confident in that, the difference between going from a small scale to a large scale just naturally comes because we've already built it on the right platform.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Ian, question for you. I know you talked about the advantages, of multiple cellular providers in the network. I mean, we talk about Eseye as that network of networks. Can you talk a little bit about the advantages that this provides to enterprises, especially those that are deploying globally, over dealing with a single provider, as an example?
Yeah, I mean, where it adds most value is exactly as you say, when you're looking at a global deployment, multi-region deployment, and you're really not wanting to, add a huge level of operational complexity to the business that's deploying that service. So dealing with what is a large fragmented operator base due to regulatory framework of cellular providers, and obviously then taking into account that regulatory framework often adds complexity around permanent roaming restrictions and those sorts of things. So very much the AnyNet solution is designed, as you say, a network of networks, multiple operators under the hood, and post-deployment configuration that's appropriate to the location and the solution that's being used. And then additionally, on top of that is the security, AnyNet secure element of it, which is the post-deployment security certificate deployment to the device itself. So yeah, it's certainly very much more attractive for global deployments because that's where the cost of managing and deploying that solution is much higher.
Great. Thank you very much, Ian. So maybe this, a couple here questions, maybe just to the general, our panelists. Let me just take a look here. Maybe this would be more specific to Dave, I guess. For the retail example, was the implementation 100% remotely implemented, or did it involve any physical interaction with the 50,000 retail devices?
Well, in that particular example, the company did have a way of doing some generic updates to the machines that were out in the field. So you can view that as being something where we did not have to go out and touch those machines because they had this ability to update them with Databe, and then at that point, able to take on the kind of current or future capabilities. But it always depends on the deployment. So when it's a brand new device, oftentimes, either we can find a way, depending on the type of customer, to get designed in from is there a sort of a OEM or manufacturer, so it's kind of baked in from the device to the get-go, or other methods of getting on there depending on their situation.
Great, thank you, Dave. So to stay specific to our time, what I want to do is kind of maybe move to our summary. First of all, I'd like to thank, of course, all of our speakers for their time and their insights on this topic. Just to summarize what we learned today, we really talked about why is device management critical to success. And, Dave really talked about a number of different points on here, really how do you operate, minimize operational costs, drive process consistency across your organization, and really automate time-consuming manual tasks such as, physically visiting remote devices, right? I mean, to scale this, to do at scale, of course, the ability to do this stuff remotely. Again, avoiding this this under and over investment in terms of what you need to do, dealing with the security, enabling remote management, and monitoring. I mean, these are some of the, some of the hallmarks in terms of, what are the benefits of doing this. And as you can see here, with the case study we presented here, there's a lot of things that this solution provides. And for those of you who are, really looking to, make versus buy a solution with respect to device management, strongly urge each and every one of you to look further, reach out, and obviously see if there's an opportunity for us to help you see the art of possible. So with that, I am going to close and thank everybody again for your time and your efforts here today. So appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.